Amy, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Morning, yes. Do you have any updates for the domestic violence part of Newcastle?
So DVCC met and had a wonderful presentation about having pets be able to enter DV shelters. We had a wonderful conversation and are actually going to pursue some avenues that we either didn't know existed or are not well connected. Just letting folks know we are taking service animals into the DV shelters. But at this point, we're not really having a robust and effective network to address all the pet needs of DV victims who need shelter. So it's an avenue we're going to work on. So that's the big takeaway. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. We had our meeting on November the 13th, and one of the highlights was that we had representation from the Maryland Department of Health. They hadn't been joining us, so that was good. And they said going forward, they will be a part of the meeting again, so that way we can get information from them about what's going on at the hospitals. Secondly, we have 17 people now awaiting transfer to MDH beds. Last month it was 18, so we're making a little bit of progress. And going forward, what we're going to do in 2025, I'm going to start inviting speakers to speak at the Forensic Work Group Committee meeting from different programs, as well as some of our former participants, so they can tell us about the challenges that they've encountered after being released. You're welcome.
We'll go into our presentation. Has been set and time for us to it. Ali, I've been working on a process resource map as far as the resources available for individuals with mental health crises in the criminal justice system, and they did a great job. So I will turn it over to Joy.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So as Lauren said, we have been working with different departments, many of which are in the room. So thank you all so much for meeting with us over the past few months to really map out this system. So as we discussed before, the entry point was always going to be police interaction, the exit point being the corrections facility. Obviously, there are different offshoots within that process, but the overarching goal was to map mental health services that would be available for individuals who become involved with the justice system. So I'm going to briefly go over the process overview, and then I'm actually going to pass it to Ali to go through the different departments. Because there's so many different departments, we did not create just one full document because that would be a lot for us to absorb. So this is the process that we took, and then we will actually go through those specific departments. So like I said, entry point is police. The next step would be pretrial, then courts, BCDC, and then the reentry program. Obviously, pretrial, BCDC, courts, that is the process, but sometimes because pretrial is within the corrections facilities, we thought it was best to show pretrial first because some people are released, some people are then sent to BCDC.
Hey, Joy.
Yeah.
So sorry. Maybe by making,
Go ahead and.
by clicking out of the participant dialogue box, just to make it a little bit bigger.
Yes, you can.
Or
Go ahead, fix it right there.
There we go.
Is that better for everyone?
maybe.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we can also kind of zoom in as we go through the different departments. All good? Go ahead.
So I'm going to start to walk through different departments, just in case you see some symbols on this process map. An exclamation point are areas that might need extra support or capacity that we'll highlight as we're walking through. And then boxes that are highlighted are an actual mental health resource.
Oh, one more thing. So this is adult focused.
Oh, yeah.
We did have some conversations with a few of you about youth services, so they're in there, but this conversation is adult focused specifically, okay? Right.
Okay, so we'll start with police, the entry point. I'll start with talking about MCT, the mobile crisis team. I put it in the center there because MCT ties into some different aspects of the police process. So MCT consists of a clinician and a trained police officer who go out to attend for those in crisis, whether it's crisis intervention, referring someone to resources, following up after an incident, whatever it may be. There's an exclamation point on MCT as they do have limited capacity, specifically with the number of clinicians that they have.
And the overwhelming amount of calls that they take in. So capacity in terms of if they're receiving 500 calls, can they actually respond to 500 calls based on the need and the team that they are currently staffing?
So on the left, we have patrol. I'll try this, not better. So police are called to the scene. Someone's in mental distress. One of three outcomes can occur. An arrest may occur, at which point they'll be taken back to the precinct, and there will be an assessment for suicidal ideation. If there's no suicidal ideation, they'll move forward to pretrial. If there is, up to those in the precinct, they'll either just be monitored or an emergency petition can take place. Another outcome, if police are called to the scene, is that they might just provide resources. There's different community resources they can provide, including being referred to MCT. And then the third outcome is an emergency petition might take place. They might take this person to the emergency room, at which point you have another exclamation point because there's limited capacity at emergency rooms. There's long wait times. Officers or MCT clinicians can get held up there waiting for that wait time, unable to respond to other calls. That's patrol. Like Joy said, focused on adults, but just to give an idea of what some youth services look like, there's the Joints program, which is juvenile offenders in need of supervision. There's also some different community programs, and then at school, youth have access to their SRO. So this is the police aspect. I'll go back, and we'll go to pretrial. Okay. So across the different levels of supervision, level 1, level 2, and home detention, there is a resource sheet that is available with mental health resources. It has things like hotlines, different centers and nonprofits. Pretrial staff will also use the SAMHSA tool. It's like a locator. You can enter in like a zip code, and it'll tell you what resources are geographically close to the defendant. And then also MCT is recommended for urgent needs for someone in pretrial. Level 1 is a dash line, since it's not always provided, but it can be if they see fit. Home detention, they have their own mental health resource packet that is handed out to those on home detention. Again, similar things like hotlines, centers, different housing recommendations, things of that nature. And if someone is placed in BCDC for pretrial, BCDC has their own mental health resources that we'll talk about in a minute. That's pretrial. Move forward to courts. This one's, I'll try my best to zoom in. It's a lot. So if the courts, they have problem-solving court, which has 3 aspects: the competency docket, mental health court, and then recovery court. For the competency docket, it will start with a competency evaluation request. If someone is declared competent, they'll move forward to trial court. If they're declared incompetent, they'll be placed on the competency docket, and then we'll have that placement in the Maryland Department of mental health bed. But that waiting period is at BCDC. Like for before, there's an exclamation point there, since that waiting period is a lot longer than expected. Should be 10 business days, but we've seen cases where it's over 77 days where they're waiting. If competency is restored within the time limit of their sentence, they'll return to trial court with an aftercare letter. If competency is not restored, then either involuntary civil commitment can take place, or the case may be dismissed if they're determined to be not dangerous. So that's competency. In the middle is mental health court. Again, starts with an eligibility evaluation. If they're not eligible, they're going to move to trial court. If they are eligible, whether it's pretrial, post-plea, or post-sentence, the mental health court program will be developed. This mental health court program has 4 phases. First phase is focused on assessment and stabilization. So they're looking for someone to be taking medication, going to therapy. They might have drug testing, they might have a curfew. Phase 2, looking for them to engage in treatment. So they should be progressing in their treatment. They might seek educational or vocational training, and they'll start to develop a financial plan. The third phase is pro-social rehabilitation, where they'll be maintaining their housing, engaging in that educational or vocational training, and looking at payment of treatment expenses. And then the last phase, phase 4, is recovery maintenance and relapse prevention. So looking for compliance with all treatment in a stable living arrangement, maintaining employment or educational training, and payment of all expenses. So that's the mental health court program. It's highlighting, it's the resource, but also has an exclamation point. In talking with the mental health court team, they talked about how, in order to develop this program, an evaluation must occur, where they're looking for a diagnosis and treatment recommendations. Currently, the Office of Court Psychiatry is the party that completes this evaluation, and they have 30 days to do so. But in order to get resources to individuals faster, they're looking for more capacity at the Office of Court Psychiatry to complete these evaluations, or access to an outside resource to complete these evaluations. So that is mental health court. On the right side, we have recovery court, very similar to mental health court, so I'll kind of move through quickly, but starts with an eligibility evaluation. If they are eligible, they'll have a recovery court program developed, which has the same 4-phase structure as mental health court program, just maybe some different steps within there. So these are the courts. And we'll move to BCDC. So if someone is admitted to BCDC, it'll start with a medical and mental health screening. This helps to determine their housing assignment. So they might go to general population, they might go to mental health housing, or they might go to special observation. So for mental health housing, there's different units they might be placed on. 2S is the female unit, and this has the START program, which is Striving to Achieve Recovery Together. And then TAMAR, which is Trauma, Addiction, Mental Health, and Recovery. These are mental health programs there. That's where they're highlighted. 3S is a male unit, and they have the mental health wellness program that individuals can participate in. 4S is another male unit. This is where the most critical mental health care is. This is also where those who are incompetent to stand trial have that waiting period until the bed at MDH opens up. Again, the exclamation point for the same issue of the waiting period for those IST. Other options, someone might be in a medical unit or in process. If someone is in special observation, if they're showing signs of suicidal ideation, they'll either be in suicide watch, intermediate watch, or close watch. And once they become stable, they can move to mental health housing or go to general population. In the middle, we talk about substance abuse support. So BCDC has the MAP program, medically assisted treatment program. This has an exclamation point as there's limited capacity of the MAP program, and there is a wait list to start the MAP program. We do quickly touch on youth services on the right, mainly to note that there are limited to no resources available for youth experiencing mental health issues at BCDC. They will go through the same medical and mental health screening that adults do. They could potentially have new medications prescribed with parental consent, but that's a pretty rare occurrence. If they are going to school, then they might have access to a school psychologist or an IEP. But other than that, there's not many resources available to youth at BCDC. And we'll move to reentry. So when someone is released back to the community from BCDC, there's some different resources available. If they were participating in one of the mental health programs, whether it was START or TAMAR or the mental health wellness program, they can continue to participate in this program for up to 12 months after their release. BCDC will also help them transition to community services if needed. They'll ensure that individuals have insurance. They can provide a 30-day supply of prescription for certain medications, and they will also help them transition to community programs for mental health and substance abuse. There's an exclamation point up here as there's some limited capacity at BCDC. They don't always have the ability to follow up and check in on individuals after they've completed this transition.
So for context, the reentry program is ran by one person. And so the capacity is even if you have so many people who are going through the system, the plans are being created, but it's only one person who is responsible for the follow-up. And so what may happen is if an individual is referred to a program, the program may come back and say, hey, Jane Doe did come or did not come. But with one person and so many people in the reentry program, it is very difficult to actually conduct follow-up because it's one person that is responsible for all of it.
Baltimore County Health Department also has some resources. We have a star here. We didn't have the ability to follow up and kind of learn more about that, but that is an option. Okay, and then lastly, I just wanted to provide some examples of what community resources looks like. We talk about it a lot, but I wanted to provide some concrete examples. So the county has the MCT team, they have their crisis response number, there's urgent care clinics, different programs for adults, children, and elderly. Substance abuse, there are MAT clinics, opioid detox services, other referrals, housing centers, career centers, things of that nature. Maryland state has their own list of resources. There's also national and federal resources, whether it's National Institute of Mental Health, also NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness for nonprofits. And then a list of just some of the hotlines that are available for different scenarios.
I'm just gonna- we'll get the whole- There we go.
Can we share this PowerPoint?
That's gonna have, do you guys mind if
We do not mind.
yes, I'll send this out. Great.
Okay, so those, I think we kept it to about 10 minutes.
Well, the question is, what if anything are we trying to do about the explanation?
Yes.
I mean, those are the places that are the problems. And I guess we have to talk about whether, maybe that'll be another week. But,
No,
We'll get some of that.
okay, with the police, okay. Yeah.
And that's why we wanted Joy and Ally to work on this. See visually. It's good.
So, the police department was asked to present a couple of, present some scenarios to help the group talk through and keep an analysis of where the issues and gaps are. And we're very appreciative that Lieutenant Captain Greenbeck, who commands our behavioral assessment unit.
Could I do
gives a
something?
presentation
No.
of
Good.
those scenarios. Also here, with us today, we have Colonel Chris Kelly, who is
Morning.
Bureau Commander, Major Rick Kern, Executive Officer for the Operations Bureau. Captain Brian Edwards is on, WebEx, and our EAI Director Mark Bell.
Clicking.
Chief McCall was trying to join by WebEx. I don't see him as a panelist. He maybe, this one, I'm not sure. Turn it over, Kathy.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm going to stand back here. Don't feel like you have to turn around for me or anything, but my name is Lieutenant Catherine Greenbeck. I am the commander of our behavioral assessment unit at the police department. Mobile crisis team is one of the teams that falls under my oversight. So like Meg explained, I'm just going to go through a couple of really high level explanation things, and then I want to go into 3 different summaries, very high level summaries of actual cases. One is a very typical acute case that mobile crisis handles. They're not our repeat callers. They're the typical call. Sometimes a little easier than this one, sometimes a little harder than this one. And then I have 2 what I call chronic examples. And those are what we call our high utilizers. These are our most challenging cases that typically end up in the criminal justice system. All right, so we already know, Joy, I loved that map because it totally put the whole thing in perspective. You don't need to know this little piece because we have a police officer and a social worker. There are a number of pathways that people can get to mobile crisis. The first and main one is through 911 center. We have a pilot program going on in the 911 center for a call center clinician that we have social workers from Affiliated Sante, who is our contracted vendor through the health department, who are staffing our 911 center. They are, when a call with an individual in behavioral crisis calls, they can be transferred to that clinician for de-escalation, for problem solving, and that clinician does then have the option to escalate back to 911 for patrol response. They can request a mobile crisis response, et cetera. But most of our calls come through 911, and patrol will typically be the first on the scene. Patrol then recognizes that there's a mental health, behavioral health issue, and they call for mobile crisis. Another pathway is through Baltimore County Crisis Response, through our hotline. People call into the hotline. If there is, those counselors work with the person on the phone. If an additional response is needed, they have the ability to bring in what's called MRT, mobile response teams. Those are the non-police crisis response. They have a clinician and a peer, that pair in a car, that is no police involved in that response whatsoever. They also have the ability to send mobile crisis to the scene of that, which obviously is a co-responder police response, or if there is a safety, violence, urgent kind of issue, they can kick it right back to 911 to get patrol there. And then we get referrals. Many of you in the room have helped us with this. Individuals sometimes email our county executive, they email our precinct commanders, they email our chief, and they're obviously having behavioral health issues or in crisis, and we get those referrals and we go out and proactively check on those people and try to provide and connect them with resources. Our clients, I put them into a couple of different categories. One is the acute ones, range from people who are, I'm feeling sad and I don't know how to deal with it. So we'll send someone out, they'll do a clinical assessment, they'll maybe just talk with them and problem solve with them, all the way up to more substantial behavioral issues, more severe mental illness, intellectual developmental disability, substance abuse, dementia. It can be anything. The next categories are chronically mentally ill. They fall into, you have a whole population of people who are very effectively managed through whatever means. They may be in a supervised setting. They may have a comprehensive treatment plan that's really working for them. But then we have our high utilizers where the treatment plans aren't working for whatever reason. The plans that are in place for them are not resulting in positive outcomes. And our clients fall into both the adult and the child categories. So first, we're going to use initials just to protect people's personal information. XW, Miss W, she's a 34-year-old female. This is going to be a typical everyday, many times a day type of a case. We got 2 911 calls. The first one was from the female who said, I'm not feeling well. So that elicited an EMS response. And then we got a second call from the male who is her husband, who said, she locked me out of the apartment. I'm on the balcony and I'm locked out. So that ended up with a police response. So police and EMS both recognized right away there's a mental health issue involved. I wish I could show you some of the body camera, but because it would be very clear what was, it would be clear for you. But mobile crisis responded. They observed that the female was extremely disoriented. She was confused, walking up and down the stairs. She had an iPad in her hand that was clearly broken, but she's pressing on it and she's not understanding what's going on. It was very clear that there was something going on here. Her husband revealed to mobile crisis that she was diagnosed with bipolar depression, and that he believed she was taking her medications properly, but he wasn't 100% sure. Mobile crisis did decide to write an emergency petition for her. However, as is often the case, she was not cooperative in that endeavor. They were up 3 flights of steps. So some of the challenges, getting her safely down the steps. EMS stayed with us to try to help us, maybe put her in a chair and wheel her down. No, it was not happening. She tried to push past our officers. She held onto railings. She dropped herself to the floor. And overall, her demeanor, she was afraid and she was confused. There were a lot of people at that scene. Everybody tried to step back and allow the mobile crisis officers. At that point, it was the police officers that were involved. 2 of them together, very compassionate, very gentle. They spent over an hour trying to persuade her gently down the steps in a way that wouldn't hurt her. Ultimately, they're down to the last half a flight of steps, and one had to pick up her arms and the other had to pick up her legs and deliver her to the stretcher that was waiting outside, where they could strap her in and get her to the hospital safely. This is a really rare success that she was admitted inpatient to St. Joe's. I can't remember the last time we emergency petitioned somebody that was admitted inpatient. So it's very rare for that to happen, but that's a success for us. So that's a typical. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes they go smoother than that and sometimes not smoother than that. But our next one is a chronic, what we call a chronic case. MK, This lady, she's a sweetheart. She's a 71-year-old female. She's out of the White Marsh precinct. We have a long history with her. She suffers from paranoid delusions. The little caveat is that she's a retired psychiatric nurse. And so she knows when mobile crisis is coming. She looks at our people, she looks at them and says, I know who you are. I'm not talking to you. She will not engage with mobile crisis at all. We saw an increase in police calls from her and from the neighbors since 2021. We saw that the calls doubled from year to year to year regarding her, and her behavior was escalating. So her delusions are things like, I'm being infused with rape drugs. People are breaking into my house when we go and check that, and nobody's breaking into her house. They're worshiping devils over there. They're raping children next door. So she believes this, and it's significant. Those delusions are significant for her. She has in the last year become fixated on her next door neighbor. She will stand in her yard and scream at him all of the delusions that she has. You're doing this, you're worshiping the devil, you're screaming at him and his family. She will lean out her window screaming. She has recently driven her car in front of his driveway and blocked his driveway, screaming at him and his family. So this has become a pretty significant issue for the precinct's community outreach as well, because they're getting calls from the neighbors about this. And again, refuses to talk to mobile crisis at all. She believes that she knows what's going on, and you can't convince her otherwise. So fast forward to this past August, we were working with the precinct's community outreach. It was a new set of supervisors there, and they were very eager to really solve this problem. It's not quite that easy, but we had one of our mobile crisis officers write a very comprehensive EP with about a 10-page justification. Usually we do it in about a paragraph. This was literally 10 pages of text, describing the whole picture and really painting it for the judge that was to sign that. We got the EP for her. She was released from the hospital. That was very frustrating for the precinct. The precinct decided they were going to charge her. We very strongly suggested that they reach out to Michelle Fuller in the state's attorney's office to consult with her about what's the best way to do this. They did, and they ended up filing charges for harassment, telephone misuse, and disturbance of the peace for her. She was issued a summons, and she currently has a competency hearing scheduled for January. Very unlikely that she's going to be found competent. One question I have related to your presentation is that, one, I didn't see a female mental health, like in non-competent female wing in BCDC. And two, she was never actually incarcerated. So if she's found incompetent, will she have to go to BCDC anyway?
I'm gonna ask the BCDC, but I believe 2F is a female one.
We have a section in the C where
if someone received a summons and never was actually incarcerated prior to the competency hearing and then was found incompetent, would they then go back to their home to await the next steps, or would they be remanded to BCDC at that point with the charges?
that's up to the judge.
It would be up to the individual judge. Okay.
It's going to be a dangerousness determination. So if they're incompetent and dangerous, there's a very good likelihood that they will be committed back to BCDC in order to be placed in a safer environment for everybody. But it will be a judicial determination.
Okay. This is a kind of a challenging one. One, because her behaviors are escalating, and they're escalating to the point where it has everyone involved kind of really concerned for what's coming next. At the same time, she hasn't committed any violent acts yet, and she's 71 years old. Kind of just a challenge. I don't envy you all your task there. Current status on her, neighbors are still calling. She's still engaging in those behaviors related to her delusions, and the outreach is actively working with Michelle Fuller on this case. So we're still following. And the final example that I wanted to give you today is a 28-year-old male, JT. We have an extensive history with this young man. I saw records dated back to 2016. It could go further back than that. He has, he at times will call our BCCRS hotline 100, 200 times in a day. He needs a lot of attention. He lives with his parents who are immigrants from China. So we have cultural, definite, like, don't trust systemic processes and whatnot. They are not his guardians. He does have a congenital brain defect, which causes him to have impulse control. He also has neurological issues. For him, he really wants help. He does, but he's not capable of engaging in the treatment that's laid out for him. So it's a challenge. For him, when he calls 911 and says, I'm suicidal, he even says, I want to jump in the harbor. But he's been saying that same thing for many, many years. That's his baseline. But when he says I'm suicidal, he means I'm feeling really sad and I don't know what else to do. I don't know how. He doesn't know how to deal with that. So challenge. He does fixate on certain people. He in the past has fixated on our hotline counselors. Currently, he is fixated on one of our police officers, and he's often calling 911 because he wants to see her. He has been EP'd many, many, many times, and he has always been released. Often he's released because he will not engage in the process. So when you take them to the hospital, they first are triaged and then they have to be medically cleared and then they go into the psychological part. However, he'll get to a certain point, maybe it's when they're going to draw blood or whatever point that is, and he'll say, nope, not doing it, not doing it. And throughout, they'll have other engagements with him and they decide, okay, well, he's not a danger to himself or others, so we're releasing him, we're discharging him, but he wants help. So he refuses to leave. He says, no, I'm just going to keep calling 911 until I get the police back here. And I'm not leaving because I need help. And it's this very circular situation with him. So August of 23 is one of these hospital incidents. This was Franklin Square Hospital. He goes exactly what I just described. He refuses. They discharge him. He says, no. The hospital ends up they call the police to have him removed. He's charged with trespassing, which ended up I think it was a good thing for him just because it ended up sending him to Spring Grove for a time. He went to Spring Grove for, I think it was a few months. He was calling our hotline from Spring Grove. Hey, I'm at Spring Grove. I'm having a good time. He actually liked it there. I think it provided him with the structure and the attention that he needed in order to manage himself, but he was released. And he has since then had another telephone misuse charge because he's still doing his thing. So current status on him, he currently has in-home assistance and he has case management. These things aren't really helping him right now because I'll go into that in a minute. One of our supervisors with Affiliated Santé is working very actively to link him up with targeted case management, which will give him a little bit more individualized treatment and attention, and trying to get him into some kind of a daycare to keep him busy through the day. He is still calling our hotline in 911. When I spoke with a social worker with Santé who knows him very well. It was her opinion that what he needs for guardianship to be established, because his parents are not his guardians and they're not going to be effective guardians for him. He needs targeted case management. A group home setting would benefit him, and a day program. So it's pretty comprehensive wraparound that he needs. Maybe we can get there one day with him. And that's all I have. Anybody has any questions for me or about any of those cases? Yes, sir.
For the 71-year-old, do you, what are the efforts, I guess, to engage family involved, if there are family?
There is a daughter who is no longer, the daughter's estranged from her now. And she was involved for a while, but she can't, and so the family is not really able to provide us any assistance there. Yeah. All right.
On the guardianship piece, the
Yeah.
challenges of guardianship is it doesn't really actually give you power genuine power over an adult, then you can get guardianship of person, guardianship of property. It can facilitate handling of benefits, payments, things like that. But the guardian of person can say, this is all arranged for you, live here. But if the person doesn't stay, it doesn't give the, it isn't like with a child where you can actually, the child can say you have to be here. So even getting a guardian, you'd have to actually analyze what, with adult protective services, whether a guardian could actually do anything more effective than.
I have a little, just as a little aside, I have, my nephew is in a group, lives in a group home setting and it's supervised. And his mother, my sister, is his guardian. He is also a frequent caller to 911. He wants the ambulance to come when his stomach hurts. And they know him in Anne Arundel County and everything else. But with her being the guardian, she's able to monitor every single step. She's able to push back on things. With him, maybe it's the group home staff that is the guardian. And again, I'm not an expert in this area. So I'll just say that it will provide some kind of direction and coordination, direct coordination for this individual on a day-to-day basis with decision-making power.
Yeah, no, I don't
think there's an easy solution at all.
It might help, but it doesn't, if they're non-compliant.
When my nephew leaves his group home, all stops are pulled out and everybody goes and searches for him. And it's the vulnerable adult status
Sure.
that ends up doing it, so. Yes.
Question about the emergency petitions.
Mhm.
So I'm assuming based off your presentation that it's more likely that when they get to the hospital, they're eventually released rather than,
Almost every time.
okay.
Within about, would you say 2 hours?
Between 2 and 4 hours typically, yeah.
So do you have any insight into what that process is, like once they get to the hospital and how they're coming to the determination that they can be released?
I believe through my experience that the reason why most of them are being released is because they have no beds to put them in. I mean, I had a conversation with a nurse at a hospital. This was when I was in patrol. There was somebody actively suicidal. It was clear, I was very concerned. And it takes a lot for me to feel that concern because there's a lot of behaviors, right, that don't mean action. I was very concerned. So I got on the phone with the hospital. Normally we don't do that, to say, you don't think he needs to be admitted? And the nurse said, oh, I definitely think he needs to be admitted, but I can't tell my attending that I'm taking up a bed for the whole weekend with this guy. And that was literally his response to me. That may be an isolated incident, but we all know that there is a very real shortage of mental health beds. They don't have it. It probably generates no money for them to keep those beds. And again, not an expert. I have a very limited viewpoint on this, but almost always it's very, very rare for them to be admitted.
When you say mental health beds, is that the same as crisis beds?
I think they can be the same thing. But a crisis bed to me, and somebody, there's Ari, I'm sure.
So crisis beds are a level below hospitalization. Typically, not always, typically somebody who's been hospitalized, say Shepherd Bradford, where some list has health capacity, and that's a step down closer to zero integration. It's not generally the first stop. It can be, right? It can be, but typically it's
I only asked the question because I know that we're also short on crisis beds. So don't think it is a unique situation
No.
in that.
And I think it's
Yeah.
nationwide. It's
Yeah.
not just us. Yeah.
So is the standard that the hospital has to come to is that the person is not a threat to themselves or others in order to be released?
I can't speak for the hospital, but I can say that's the police criteria for taking them. It's usually a psychologist or a psychiatrist.
have to be evaluated, part of the process from the hospital.
Well, we're trying to follow the jail also.
Mhm.
We would have someone that is that powerful that saying that he's mentally sick and we'll take them to in 5 hours after they are in that position, they will say, "Come and get it." will be back and forth. They say these released, we're gonna put back in them, back, bring them back to jail. Then the same thing started, and we have to keep them in there. With the revolving door.
And to be fair, if we would need hospital folks in the room to really answer that properly. I mean, to be fair.
All right, if they do admit someone, then their hospital can be stuck with that.
Yeah. More, yeah. Stuff, because the resource. Still can't do it, just at the moment. You know, so we talked about it earlier, about Maryland Department of Health, Surrey Grove, the number of hospital beds across the state for people. It's just very. So we do end up often more times with youth than with adults, because there are more capacity for adults. But it's also, it's a short term. It's intended to be short term. It's not intended to be somebody's living situation. So often what we're hearing in these cases, individuals who are maybe acutely problematic right that second, but then they get to the hospital, they get to a place where they're evaluated and settle down. They don't want to go back to their previous situation, but that's the reality. And so then when they get back to, as Mr. Servant was saying, they get back to that setting, let's say a PCD, well, I don't want to be here. So I can escalate myself, but it's not that they necessarily, and I'm not making a proclamation of whether to do that, but they can, in certain settings, they can appear to not need that level of intensive services, so then they are not.
Question?
There were concerns at the last meeting. There was discussion about a case report in the press with a high utilizer and that there were some judgments about should the person be charged. And I think this example that Lieutenant Joe is sort of how the police ends up approaching it, you know, in discussion with states without violating people's confidentiality. I don't know how we explain that and more effectively in the community, but
I tried to explain it to the press and I put it in terms of, unfortunately, sometimes the only answer is to make an arrest. It was not received very well. But as we've just heard,
Yeah.
you know, it may be the only option. I mean, look at the guy who ends up getting the spring run.
It just, I think, to me, the big issue is that we don't have this other outlet. And that's the thing, I think the police, I get, and Scott and I have talked about this at great length, is the police don't have anywhere to put somebody. The jail ends up getting placed with a person that should not be in the jail. They need to be in a mental health. And that's I think the thing that we need to put pressure on as a group collectively, not just here, but around the state, is on that mental health piece. You know, when we're following these motions and all of that, is to try to get the department to step up and say, you know what, we need to come up with not just like bring everybody in here and keep them in here for many, many years or months, but you need stabilization centers. I love that idea that we've been talking about, just so that you have other outlets as opposed to just criminalizing mental health, which is unfortunately what we keep seeing.
And to surprise all of you, I completely agree with what Jimmy said. I mean, well, I'd rather they not be at your location. You know, I mean, I think we need it. Yeah.
absolutely.
You saw an article that a director in Montgomery County put together with some other folks about the cost of jails housing that. It just came out a few days ago. And it's extraordinary, the amount.
Mhm.
And they end up in our facility, which they really should be somewhere else.
Right.
Not ours.
And and this is an idea I've floated, and I don't know what it gets us in the end, but is the counties taking a stand at a civil level, whether it's a class action lawsuit, whatever it is, it's something at that level that gets the attention and says, you know what? This is a huge problem and we need to fix it. Because Baltimore County is not the only one
Oh, no.
dealing with this
No,
issue,
no,
obviously.
But then they'll build a facility in your backyard. You know, and
I mean, and that's the,
that's
yeah.
the stopping point.
But is the gap, is it the Spring Grove? Beds, like, I mean, we know Spring Grove beds are a big gap, because we have people sitting, the judge has said they shall go there, and then there isn't a bed, and they're sitting in the jail, so that one is kind of obvious. Is there some of the other things where we have not full resources like MCT? MCT is not a service, MCT is a police response, that is, should be bridging to the service. So, and stabilization center is also really a service, it's a 1 day bridge to, right? So if for the county to effectively call for what's really needed, is there anything besides the NDH hospital, the Spring Grove type hospital bed? Is there something else we should be asking for, or is that inpatient mental health bed actually the biggest thing?
That's the biggest thing. So probably 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I reached out to Shepherd Pratt, and they actually solicited me and says, what can we do? I put this problem on their lap, and I'm thinking, oh, this is the mental health hospital. I have crickets since then, because they don't want to get involved in this. And you see that, that's why they're getting discharged without, they go into the hospital and they're out within 2 hours, because people don't want to take on this issue, whether it's the funding piece of it, whether it's just other issues that are associated with it. But
Means reimbursement isn't there.
right,
Means the Medicare
that's
Medicaid
exactly what it
reimbursement
is.
Isn't there. Because if it was, the hospitals would be providing a pavilion and a, area to do it.
It comes down to beds. You're actually exactly right. Every county, we go to our statewide meetings with other counties. It's every county. We went, myself and Deputy Greer went to Nashville to the large jail conference meeting with, 80 of the largest jails. It's the same thing. Every state is dealing with a lack of mental health beds, and it's very sad. There's not an investment in that, because it's not just going to go away.
No, it's just, we see it in court every day, Judge. Every day you see people coming in and you're going, this person really shouldn't be here. They need to be somewhere else other than in this system that we have set up. But it's the only thing we have, and it's puts pressure on groups that I don't think are really intended to handle that type of pressure. The police, the jails, the judges, people on the front line that are having to deal with this chronically every day.
And I think one of the things that we are doing good in Baltimore County on all levels is that the collaboration. Just a few weeks ago, we have been dealing with this lady that is pregnant, but in denial. But working with the state attorneys and the public defender's office and the court, we placed her successfully in a program. So if we have those things going on, even on our own level, I think it helped us a lot. Especially I'm talking from the jail, from the jail standpoint, because we did everything we could have done. Work with the health department. We had a meeting. And this was a continual effort and coming to a relation to place her. I think it's a good thing. I think we should continue to do that. And every 2 weeks, we send them a list of our more high priority list. But again, they would take the folks and they would say, we don't have space. One of the issues they have in there, I can't speak for them, is also staffing. It's difficult to get people to work in those areas.
Actually, I want to go back to the hospital bed thing. And Ari, if we just made a big push, more beds at Spring Grove, are we going to get a legitimate pushback that not all these people need to be hospitalized? Yes, they're not functioning well. Yes, they're a problem, ladies screaming at her neighbor and all that. But if someone has a mental health issue that that you can't really medicate, that you can't, that stay in the hospital isn't going to resolve. What is the response we're going to get on that?
What I'm hearing is people are interested in some form of congregate care, whether it's a group home, residential center, residential rehabilitation, which is more community-based. The system values people living in their communities. And the idea of institutionalizing people because they're challenging is a challenging idea. So we completely, not completely, but in a few generations, we've gone around that circle to back. Well, what I'm hearing the advocacy for is we want to institutionalize people. It's not where our system is going, has been going, and it's not headed that way. What we do need, it sounds like, is a significant increase in the quality and the quantity of programs and options for people who have persistent mental illness to live in the community successfully. But sending them to Spring Grove or any other state hospital type setting is an acute type thing. They have a real need at that moment, and maybe a few months, right? Maybe a long period, relatively long period, but it's not the intention of anyone's system at this moment to institutionalize people long term, unless they're at the most significant level, in which there, of course, are going to be those outliers. There are going to be a few people like that across every system. But I think what we should be advocating and looking towards is, are there ways to increase community-based residential high-quality programs where people can have a place to be themselves and to live successfully in the community?
So those two chronic cases that Kathy presented, those are those kind of things where you're not going to have them living the rest of their life in a mental hospital.
Correct.
But just years ago, when the state suddenly popped up all these really not well-regulated group homes, that became a huge community issue, especially on the west side of Boca. And there were people, really, it was not, it was problems in the neighborhoods. And it was in some areas sort of creating an institution in a neighborhood, because when you have one group home, you're making money, you want to expand your business. So you buy the house next door or down the street. And so we had areas where you arguably were not giving people a living in the community. We were just creating sort of a community located institution. And they were not getting the services and they were not getting it. So that's the problem. If we ask for that, you have to build the infrastructure that spreads it out, and that's what's a big job.
Excuse me, Brian Edwards has his hand up, and then Mr. Millspaw, when he's done, has a comment.
Thank you. And I think this midterm treatment, the acute when FCT is called, the long term with this institutionalization. I think Ari just hit a really great point about the different midterm cares, but the crisis beds that are allotted. Joy, this is something that you mentioned last week at the workshop at Towson University. The allocation authorized by the state is decades old. There's 20 beds authorized in Baltimore County at Shepherd Pratt, 265 statewide. If I wrote down the numbers that you gave last week correctly, these are decades old allocations, and there's no obligation that these beds go to Baltimore County residents. And so Shepherd Pratt, people bring their children here from across the state or across the country. And so, a significant portion of the beds at Shepherd Pratt might be occupied by non-Baltimore County. And there's been some resistance, and I'm not quite sure who the keeper of that is at the state, of increasing the authorized number of crisis beds. And I think that potentially could be part of the logjam in the ERs, where that you're either going to be institutionalized or you're going to be released, and there's nothing in between, such as a crisis bed.
Mark, did you have a comment as well?
Yeah, well, I put it in the chat. I think Mr. Dilks said earlier what I was alluding to, but I think looking at that crisis map or the mapping Joy and the group presented, I think the challenge with the way this system currently works is we think of it transactionally, right? What triggers a decision point? Once that decision point is triggered, we're looking for a way to essentially mitigate the problem, right? So from a police perspective or from a community perspective, It's how do we get that person into some sort of institution or facility and out of the community where it mitigates the problem that's being perceived in the community. The problem with that, and we all do it in a variety of ways, but the problem with that is that mental health isn't treated transactionally, right? So we're talking about chronic behaviors that are really challenging to address. And even, like, I know we implement in Department of Social Services for youth a lot of evidence-based practices, but you can implement an evidence-based practice that you do it exactly the same way with two different people, and one person responds positively and the other person makes no progress whatsoever, right? And so it's different than medically treating somebody. I know we're talking about using hospitals as the part of the system here, but the hospital can treat someone medically with injections, pills, whatever, and send them home, and they're sort of out of crisis status, and they're probably going to get better. Whereas with mental health, that putting somebody in the hospital generally doesn't, quote unquote, fix the problem, right? And so what we all hear, I didn't hear anybody say this, what we often hear from the hospitals is that this person who we think needs long-term institutionalized support, they say is at baseline and therefore ready for discharge. And so, that, I think the challenge with the system, the mental health system, is how do we make it more approachable and more accessible for people to get the long-term treatment services they need? And I don't think any of us have the answer to that.
Good question, Ari, who pays for those crisis beds?
Crisis beds, so it's an easy answer on why haven't they been grown? It is a state dollar only service. There's no federal match for the crisis beds. So anytime you open up a new bed, that's the state contributing 100% cost.
Even if the Medicaid eligible?
It's not Medicaid, it's not a federal Medicaid service. The state has decided years and years ago, it's a very important part of our continuum, so they fund them. But for years, they've done very, very little growth of those. We have the state only fund.
Okay, so we're just about out of time. Did everyone have a sign sheet? So for next meeting, we have some folks from Frederick County, including the place, with them to present on their crisis care center. So we heard about the model from Ari on Prince George's County model, and then next time we'll hear the Frederick. So thank you to both our presenters. That was wonderful. Happy holidays, everyone. Could I just bring up, I kept off that I wanted to just mention a couple of things before everybody leaves. Number one, since we last met, Baltimore County has joined the ranks of 4 other counties in being a Maryland Central Regional Veterans Treatment Court. We, along with Baltimore City, Harford County, Carroll County, and Howard County, have all joined together to have a centralized place where we can refer defendants who have had any type of military service whatsoever for treatment on substance abuse as well as mental health. They are referred to Baltimore City, and Baltimore City judges, prosecutors, public defenders, tons of services are directed to help folks transition and stabilize and perhaps get to a place where they can lead a life like our problem solving courts here in Baltimore County, lead a life that is hopefully free of coming back into the criminal justice system. That launched November the 12th. It was really a wonderful experience. I know Jim Dills was there, Scott Schellenberger was there, probably some others were present for that launch. The governor came, and we just had I think the Secretary of Veterans Affairs was there, Deputy Secretary was there. It was a really nice program and a good way to kick off the launch. And all Baltimore County right now is doing, we are merely referring people to Baltimore City. I've been told that Baltimore County has a very large population of self-reporting defendants who have military service. And again, it doesn't matter what branch, doesn't matter honorably discharged, dishonorably, none of that matters. If you say you have spent 1 day in the military, you could be eligible for this program.
So I think eventually Baltimore County may transition at some point in the years ahead to having its own veteran treatment court, but we're jointly with everybody else at this point. The second thing I just wanted to put on everybody's radar, because I've identified a bunch of you here. Chief Justice Bader, Chief Judge Morrissey, along with Judge Marina Savet, have decided that next year they will be having what's called a statewide summit on behavioral health. They've asked me to start identifying a team of people from Baltimore County who can participate in that. It's anticipated it will be in Ellicott City in May, and I can't recall off the top of my head. I want to say May 20th or May 21st is 22nd, 23rd. It's going to be a 2-day program. I have listed a bunch of you here, so we that says save the day, you will know what this is about. It's to try to bring together lots of people around the state to collaboratively work on some of these very issues that we are talking about here. So the chief justices have decided at the top level of the judiciary, this is what they want to see us start to focus on. So just wanted to share that with you.
We had on that before, Elise and I believe Ari is aware, we had a crisis center networking for veterans last week at Towson First, Captain Edwards was there as well. And so the courts was something that was missing from that overall map. We were aware it was just starting, so we're going to get next to you to open the room.
Absolutely, sure. Absolutely. So I'm sorry to hold everybody beyond what it's.